Good evening, listeners. Thank you for tuning into 660 on that AM dial. That quote comes from King Falls AM, a podcast that imitates a late-night radio show in a small town where everything's not as it seems. There are many fictional radio shows in the world of podcasting, like Welcome to Night Vale and The Black Tapes. However, these fictional podcasts are not the only place where the news can get a bit wild. Radio's history has been riddled with hoaxes, and today I'll be describing 3 of them to you. First, we'll tune into Orson Welles' infamous broadcast of War of the Worlds. Stay tuned to hear all about I, Libertine, the best-selling book that didn't exist. And finally, we'll cut to commercial and learn about the Talbot Mall advertising campaign. So don't touch that dial. Let me set the scene for you listeners. The date is October 30th, 1938. You turn on the radio to listen to some classical music, when suddenly it's interrupted by a news bulletin about an alien invasion in progress. You'd be terrified, and rightfully so. But if you tuned in just a few moments earlier, you would have heard that it was actually the Mercury Theatre on the air performing a live adaptation written by Orson Welles of the classic piece of literature War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. No relation. Orson Welles wanted this broadcast to sound extremely realistic, so he created it in the form of a bunch of news bulletins that would tell the story, instead of telling it as a regular story. According to the video, The Broadcast That Terrified a Nation by Inside a Mind, Orson Welles instructed the lead actor playing the lead reporter to use the Hindenburg disaster as inspiration when saying his lines. Unfortunately, Orson Welles' plan for realism worked a little bit too well, when the next day, headlines were full of reports of mobs in the streets, people leaping off of buildings, and general mass panic. However, that mass panic that this broadcast is so well known for today may not have been as massive as we've been led to believe. According to a phone survey conducted by C.E. Hooper the night of the broadcast, a measly 2% of listeners were even tuned in to the Mercury Theatre on the air that night. It's estimated that less than 50 people left their homes in fear of aliens. 50 is not a number to balk at, but is nowhere near the mass panic that the papers were talking so much about. So why did they lie? Well, they wanted the general public to stop trusting the radio as a source of news and return to the newspaper instead. And with readers comes advertisers, so in the end, it's all about the money. Now that we look back on it, this radio hoax is a lot more fake than we once might have thought. Next up is I, Libertine, the best-selling book that didn't exist. According to the University of Tulsa, this hoax started in April of 1955. New York radio DJ Jean Shepherd was fed up with people pretending to be scholars because they followed the newest fads that they were told to follow by the big lists, like the New York Times best-selling list. So, with the help of his dedicated fans, which according to Hoax.org he referred to as night people, they came up with a plot to smoke out the phonies. Together, they came up with the fake book, titled I, Libertine by Frederick R. Ewing. Once they came up with the book, Jean Shepherd instructed the night people to go out to their local bookstores and ask about buying the book. The thought was that if enough people started talking about it, those not in on the plot would think that it was real and start talking about it themselves just to fit in, and therefore smoking themselves out as a phony. This worked surprisingly well, and I, Libertine eventually made it on the New York Times best-selling list. Many absurd stories came about because of this book. One came from a college student who wrote an essay for his English class titled F.R. Ewing, an Eclectic Historian, where he not only quoted the fake book, but also fake BBC interviews with the author, and received a B+ and a note saying that he'd done superb research. Everyone from columnists to bridge players fell for this, until 16 months later, when a reporter approached Jean Shepherd about breaking the news story. The next day, on August 1st of 1956, the Wall Street Journal's headlines was all about I, Libertine and how the night people had tricked everyone into thinking that it existed. After so much discussion was stirred up about this book, a publishing company approached Jean Shepherd about making it a reality. According to the video, this best-selling novel was a total hoax by Austin McConnell. Jean Shepherd said yes, but he made sure that all the proceeds went to charity. Thank you for staying tuned through our broadcast so far, but now it's time to cut to commercial and learn about the Talbot Mall ad campaign. Unlike the other two hoaxes I've talked about so far, this one was not a nationwide phenomenon, but that didn't stop it from having a big impact. According to the article published in the Cincinnati Enquirer, titled Ads for Fake Plymouth Mall Stir Controversial Laughter by Jeff Sussex. In the fall of 1984, a large supermarket came into Cincinnati and spent a lot of advertising dollars in TV, but absolutely none in radio. That really frustrated the president of the Greater Cincinnati Radio Broadcasters Association, so he asked Jerry Galvin to come up with a plan to advertise for radio. Galvin then asked his friend, Jay Gilbert, to join him in this quest, and together they came up with the plan to create fake products to advertise on radio to show how effective it could be. According to the article, Remembering When Fake News is Fun, published in the Cincinnati Magazine in 2018, and written by Jay Gilbert, one of the creators of the hoax, after their first idea had to be scrapped, they went back to the drawing board and came up with Plymouth Mall, the first underground vertical mall. To quote the end of every single commercial, the best value in town is a hole in the ground. Plymouth Mall, coming to Greater Cincinnati soon. These advertisements started going out on 17 different local radio stations in January of the next year. They let the campaign go on for 3 weeks before they decided to bring it to a close by saying that the recent cold activity they had been experiencing had led their dig site to move due to seismic activity somewhere between Cincinnati, Ohio, and Lincoln, Nebraska. About a week after that explanation, they came properly clean and received a lot of backlash, saying what they'd done was misleading and possibly even illegal. Yes, it was underhanded to not disclose who they were actually advertising for, but according to the Burke Marketing Research Company, their ad was 60% effective, which is extremely impressive when the norm is 10% effectiveness. Well, thank you so much for listening to our program today, listeners. During today's broadcast, we covered Orson Welles' infamous broadcast of War of the Worlds that the papers exaggerated extremely. Gene Shepard's plot to smoke out the phonies with the help of his night people with iLibertine. And Plymouth Mall, the Cincinnati sensation, that showed how effective advertising on the radio can be. So, turns out fake news is a lot older than you may have once thought. So the next time you turn on the radio, or turn on a podcast, be aware that you shouldn't trust everything that you hear.